The colonial gaze, or imperial gaze. This notion extends beyond feminist theory to encompass issues of power, representation and cultural dynamics, particularly in the context of colonialism and its aftermath. The idea of the white person gazing upon the exotic is rooted in post-colonial theory and critiques of Orientalism, as famously articulated by Edward Said. This gaze reflects a way of perceiving and representing non-Western cultures through a Eurocentric lens, often resulting in stereotyping, exoticization and othering. Key aspects of this concept include power dynamics. The gaze implies a position of power where the observer, typically Western, has the authority to define and categorize the observed, non-Western culture. Exoticization, the tendency to view unfamiliar cultures as exotic, mysterious, or primitive, often reducing complex societies to simplified stereotypes. Objectification, treating the observed culture and its people as objects of curiosity or study, rather than as equal subjects.
Israeli soldiers
cultural appropriation. The gaze can lead to the commodification and appropriation of cultural elements without full understanding or respect. Representation. This concept critically examines how non-Western cultures are represented in Western media, literature, and art.
They destroyed any infrastructure still
Self-perception.
standing.
It also explores how colonized or non-Western people might internalize this gaze, affecting their self-perception and cultural identity.
Israeli soldiers set fire to the buildings. I'm now standing at the intersection of Al Jala and Al Wata. To my left is part of Al Jala Street, and ahead of me is Al Wahad Road. As you can see, the families trapped inside their homes for days are now trying to leave to the west of Gaza City, to the far right, to the far end of Al Jala Street.
When the nation was formed, the concept of freedom was indeed narrowly defined and exclusively applied. White land-owning men were the primary beneficiaries of the rights and freedoms outlined in the founding documents. This group represented a small, privileged minority of the population, while the majority, including women, people of color, and white men without property, were excluded from these basic rights. For enslaved African Americans, the contradiction was even more glaring. The nation that proclaimed liberty as an inalienable right was built on the back of a brutal system of chattel slavery. Native Americans too faced displacement, violence, and a systematic denial of their rights. Women, regardless of race, were denied many basic rights. They couldn't vote, often couldn't own property or enter into contracts, and were largely excluded from higher education and most professions. This foundational inequality has cast a long shadow over American history. The struggle to expand the circle of freedom, to make the lofty ideals of the founding documents apply to all, has been a central theme of American progress. From the abolitionist movement to women's suffrage, from the civil rights movement to the ongoing fights for equality today, much of American history can be viewed through the lens of marginalized groups fighting to claim their freedom and rights.
Freedom? Well, sign away my freedom. Why, this is ridiculous.
Don't be corny, brother.
Sure, our system of free enterprise isn't perfect. But before we throw it away for some imported double talk...
Under no circumstances, you are promising America tonight, you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one. I said, no, other than day one. We're closing the border, and we're drilling. After that, I'm not a dictator.
During World War II, the United States government implemented a policy of forced relocation and incarceration of Japanese Americans, which is one of the most controversial actions in U.S. history. Here are some key points about this period. Executive Order 9266. On February 19, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed this order, authorizing the removal of any or all people from military areas as deemed necessary or desirable. Affected population. About 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry were incarcerated, approximately 2/3 of whom were U.S. citizens. Locations: The government created and used 10 camps, euphemistically called relocation centers, primarily in western states and Arkansas. Justification: the policy was ostensibly implemented as a military necessity following the attack on Pearl Harbor, based on fears of espionage and sabotage. Living conditions: the camps were often in remote, harsh environments with poor facilities and limited resources. Loss of property: many Japanese Americans lost their homes, businesses, and personal property due to the sudden forced relocation. Duration: the incarceration lasted throughout most of the war, with the last camp closing in 1946. Loyalty questionnaire: the government administered a controversial questionnaire to assess the loyalty of those incarcerated. Japanese American military service: despite the incarceration, many Japanese Americans served with distinction in the U.S. military, notably in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. Redress: in 1988, the Civil Liberties Act provided a formal apology and reparations to surviving internees. This event remains a stark reminder of how fear and prejudice can lead to violations of civil liberties, even in democratic societies. It's often studied as a cautionary tale about the importance of protecting constitutional rights during times of national crisis.